The highest then a court in this sequence of discussion is the U.S. Supreme Court. Highest court in the country, and it is the last court. It is a court also that many would describe as a constitutional convention in continuous service. And what that simply means is that they exercise the power of judicial review. The role of the Supreme Court is to determine, under this concept of judicial review, whether the acts or the laws of government are bound by the Constitution. So they don't take any cases unless it has constitutional significance. So you have fewer and fewer and fewer cases that the Supreme Court over its history are hearing. Now, it is a constitutional convention in continuous session. And what that means is that because they are interpreting the Constitution, it is the practical equivalent of an amendment to our Constitution.
Telling the victim what to do is one thing, how to do something is different. Interpreting or just explaining or reading. Determining what course of action is best. I mean, how many of you, just by a raise of hands, have had a survivor ask you, what would you do? Should I do this? Or what would you do? Just by a raise of hands, the electronic raise of hands. Yeah, it's crazy, right? 15, 16, 17 people just raised their hands almost instantaneously, right? This is one of the most common things survivors want from us. They want to know what would you do? What should I do? Right? And as advocates, we want to answer that question, right? All of us, whether you're an attorney advocate or a non-attorney advocate, you want to answer the question. But as Jeanette, I think hopefully I'm saying that right, it wrote in the chat box, right? Ground all of this in empowerment, right? Ground it in empowerment for the survivor. You telling them you should do this is not actually building agency for them. Give them options, right? So don't determine what's in the best interest because A, that crosses into legal advice, but also it undermines the agency and the development of agency for the survivor, right? And that's an empowerment moment. So these are the red flags.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
So I mentioned It's On Us as a really great campaign that came out of the White House in 2014. And one of the big things that it's doing is highlighting affirmative consent. So traditionally, when we're thinking about sexual violence and consent, the idea is that if you're interested in sexual activity, you can basically do anything you want to the other party until they say no, until they resist, until they fight back, or unless they're completely unconscious. So it wasn't the best mechanism, especially if you're looking at trauma-informed practices that show that survivors tend to freeze. They're not all screaming, fighting, running away. Some people dissociate. Some people are not fully unconscious, but they're incapacitated or severely intoxicated and not fully aware and able to make choices in those settings or resist. So this idea of affirmative consent has really taken hold on campus. Almost every campus that I go to has a consent policy that thinks about the affirmative obligation. So just as
back to the hippocampus, and it goes through two phases. We used to train that the hippocampus just shuts down, but the bottom line is it doesn't. It goes through this hyper encoding phase that we call flashbulb memory, and then it doesn't really shut down. It just goes into a fragmented stage. So you can look at it in terms of this diagram. When the fear kicks in, when you realize, oh my gosh, this is really happening, the hippocampus appears to go through this phase of, I've got to remember this, I've got to remember this, I've got to remember this, I've got to remember this. And this is the super encoding phase. That's then followed by this minimal encoding, where your hippocampus is a little bit like a light bulb that's in the socket that's going, where the light is kind of coming on and going off and coming on and going off. That is a really important function to be aware of, because what it means is we don't know exactly what victims and survivors are going to remember and what they don't remember. We have to ask because they may have been in super encoding mode for a while.